Okay, so today we're going to move beyond individual firms to industries and focus on where profits or rents come from and how they're distributed. We'll talk about how rents come from barriers to entry, and we'll compare natural versus unnatural barriers to entry. And we'll talk about talent as one of the leading causes of rents, and that'll lead us into properties of the distribution of talent, in particular Powers laws and Zipf's law as empirical regularities. So let me begin by talking about the profits that firms earn. So Eric is not here yet. Does anyone else want to give an intuitive sense of what it is that leads a firm to make profits in a competitive industry? Remind me of your name?
Eric.
Eric Anderson, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, if it's competitive, they can't set price, so the
Yep.
firms that have more efficient cost curves, there'll be a difference between their cost at that quantity and the price that they're selling it for.
Yeah, exactly. So mechanically, it's the area to the left of the supply curve, right? The more that a firm is producing, the more area there's going to be to the left of the supply curve. But it's also the wider range of prices at which they would be willing to produce, the more that they're going to do, right? And they're always going to produce up to the point where their marginal cost is exactly equal to the price, right? So everyone is going to have their marginal cost equal to the price. So what Eric said is sort of true, but it couldn't be quite true because on that last unit, they're going to be exactly as efficient as anyone else, right? So it's really how much more efficient their average unit is compared to their marginal unit, right? So Eric was going in the right direction, but that's not quite correct in some sense, right? But other firms help determine prices, right? So what is true about what Eric said is how efficient you are relative to everyone's marginal cost. How efficient your average cost is compared to everyone's marginal cost is sort of how much better you are on average than other people in the market, right? So the two basic sources of rents under competition is that if you're able to produce more before you get to the point where you're the same as everyone else, then you're going to earn more profits. And if you are in high demand, if your marginal product is much greater, if your marginal cost is much greater than your average cost, that is, if your marginal product is much lower than your average product, you're going to earn more profits. So one way to think about this is that you've probably noticed in the world that people who are like really talented also are incredibly stressed out and in incredibly high demand, right? People are constantly trying to get a piece of them, right? And this is a simple reason why that would necessarily have to be the case. So if you think that a natural notion of stress is that on the margin you're much less productive than you are on average, right? That you get to the point where you're like worn down to the bone, right? That's exactly what in a competitive market is equivalent to earning a lot of rents. So it's always going to be the case in a competitive market that anyone who you observe doing well is also going to be very stressed out. And that's why the best restaurants are always the ones that are packed. They're also the ones that are most profitable. That's why the best doctors are always the ones in highest demand, and why talented people are constantly turning down offers to do things. Okay, so one thing that says is that if you're going to be successful, you're going to have to be saying no to a lot of stuff. Okay, so a natural question is why shouldn't someone earning rents like that encourage someone else to enter to try to imitate them and to take away some of their business? Now that's a very classic idea that in the long run, if there's free entry, people don't make any profits. And that it's only short-term advantages that allow people to make profits. So classic example of that would be the California gold rush. So in California, people were like picking up gold off of the streets. And within a year, everyone in the country had moved to California. And in fact, most of the people who ended up moving did worse than they would have done at home because they got so excited about the idea of picking up the gold there, right? So the broader idea is that anytime anyone has profits, someone will have an incentive to imitate. Another example of this was Groupon. So Groupon got out ahead, but within a year, there was like 1,000 people imitating Groupon that eroded a lot of Groupon's profits, right? If one firm is using a better technology than another firm, other firms will switch to using that firm's technology. So for example, before the introduction of the iPhone, like most things look like a BlackBerry. Most smartphones look like a BlackBerry. But then people realized that this works a lot better, right? And so now all the phones sort of look like the iPhone, right? On the other hand, if one firm is making losses, then they should exit the market. Now, unfortunately, there's a fundamental challenge to this problem, which is, I don't know if anyone's ever, raise your hand if you've ever seen or had an edible arrangement. So I guess not enough people have. I'll show you a picture of an edible arrangement for those who haven't seen one.
Isn't there a shutdown condition? Like, maybe they just haven't reached the shutdown condition yet.
So this is an edible arrangement. An edible arrangement is a bouquet of flowers, which is made of crappy fruit.
But do they offer any other products?
No, this is all they do. And I want to read you a little article from The Onion about, well, it'll speak for itself. Hold on. So edible arrangements, continued existence of edible arrangements disprove central tenets of capitalism. This actually is sourced out of my place where I went to high school. So, upending more than 2 centuries of free market theory, leading economists across the globe announced Thursday that the fundamental principles of capitalism have been irrefutably disproved by the continued existence of the designer of fruit basket company Edible Arrangements. According to the experts, the Connecticut-based franchise, which arranges skewered pieces of fruits into design vaguely resembling floral bouquets, has defied all modern economic models, expanding continuously for the past decade despite its complete lack of any discernible consumer appeal. In theory, the market should have done away with edible arrangements long ago, said AEA President Orly Ashenfelter, who added that one crucial assumption of capitalism is the idea that businesses producing undesired goods and services will fail. It's supposed to work, yet somehow, despite offering no product of any worth whatsoever, this company not only makes payroll every week, but generates strong profits. So, anyway, despite the counterexample of edible arrangements, we generally think that firms that are producing terrible products and are, should be making losses will exit the market.
But are they actually profitable?
My guess is that it's money laundering, but I have no idea. I mean, whenever you see a business like that just seems clearly to be of no value, whatever, and they're prospering, it's almost certain that it's money laundering. So another example of this is what?
I don't know if that's in general economic law.
I think consider general economic law. So in Rio de Janeiro, almost every corner has a mattress store. Like literally. And you go to any other city and there's like one mattress store in like the whole downtown area, right? So you know that there's something funky going on at that point, right?
But what's funky about this business model? Like maybe because they're just that people know them, so you mean like everybody can imitate them while they're not doing that? Maybe
Edible arrangements?
Yeah.
What's funky about edible arrangements? Have you ever seen someone receive edible arrangements and a smile come onto their face? I'm so glad that person just spent $50 to send me something which is neither good to eat nor good to look at. I mean, I don't think so. Anyway, average cost curves. Okay, so the assumption is that long-run supply curves are going to be flat at the minimum of the average cost curve because that's the point that's most efficient and firms will enter until you do that. So average cost here is defined over all possible technologies firms could use, and every firm is just viewed as being basically one short-run technology. Now, it's not quite true actually, that it's literally going to be flat. And yike is not here. Does anyone else want to say why it's not true that it'll be literally flat? Well, if there's some lumpiness and there's a small number of firms and entry has to occur at some non-trivial quantity because of fixed costs, then demand has to grow beyond the minimum in order to get another firm to enter the market. So as the number of firms grows, the elasticity of that as the market grows is going to get much smaller because you're going to be able to increase in percentage terms demand by only a little bit in order to get the next firm to enter. So this is sort of what it looks like. You know, imagine that firms each have this increasing cost. This firm is not going to enter and actually become, if there's some fixed cost of entry, this firm won't want to enter to compete with this firm until it gets to a certain size. So as the number of firms gets larger, these things are going to get increasingly flat, but with any finite number of firms, it doesn't exactly happen. So you would get a picture sort of like this, where as the number of firms gets greater, this becomes flatter and flatter, and it asymptotes to being exactly flat. But the thing that I should point out is that we made an assumption in this class so far that the number of that firms are competitive, that they're price takers. And we wouldn't think that's a very realistic assumption unless the number of firms is large enough that these types of integer problems are not serious problems. And so even though in principle this could be a problem, it's not very consistent with a competitive model for this problem to show up. It may show up in more monopolistic or imperfectly competitive models, which we'll study later. Okay. Now, of course, we could use policy to inhibit the process of firms entering and competing prices down to cost. And that could either be government intervention or private violence. And these impediments to entry are usually called barriers to entry. And does anyone want to describe some standard barriers to entry?
Licensing?
Mohammed, yeah, that's a good example. Anyone else?
Patent
Neil?
law.
What?
Patent law.
Yep, that's another great example. Yeah, so like blowing up people's factory might make them not want to enter your industry. Yeah, Rashawn?
Sort of like the network effect, why some random person just can't have another
Yeah, people
person.
might be used to using a particular network, and that might make it harder for someone else to enter. That's a good example. So there's licensed doctors, taxi drivers. There can be regulatory barriers to entry. Like there might not literally be licensed, but there might be all sorts of things you need to comply with in order to get into an industry, and that might make it very costly to enter. Violence, petty harassment is another thing that's not exactly violence, but you know, if people feel menaced, if they're a minority business owner in an area, they might not choose to enter there. Some contractual arrangements can also do this. So like, you know, you could make it, the dominant company could make contracts with a bunch of people saying if you ever sell the other guy's product, then we're going to, you know, remove all of our products from your shelf. That can also be a barrier to entry. So that was a big thing in Peru. In Peru, there's a firm that is like 99.5% of the beer market, and they made a deal with all of the vendors on the beaches that they couldn't sell any other brand of beer. And that made it very hard for people to enter the beer market in anywhere in the country because everyone drinks the most beer when they go to party on the beach. And so they can't get used to drinking another brand of beer on the beach, and therefore it's very hard for them to enter it in a supermarket in the towns. So these are usually created by lobbying, violence, or some fishy contracts. And economists call these types of activities usually rent seeking. And we view them as harmful for three main reasons. Prashant, could you say what the three main reasons why we think this sort of rent seeking is harmful are?
Well, it would diverge, for example, like lobbying, it would diverge like talented people into destructive industries.
Yeah.
Another one would be it leads to overall social wealth waste.
Yeah.
And